Hello and welcome to Calf Notes. My name is Dr. Jim Quigley, author and webmaster of calfnotes.com. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you'll find this calf note to be informative. This is calf note number 216, part 5 in the Walking the Farm series. In this video, I'll review some of the things I've observed about calf hutches and their use on dairy farms and calf ranches around the world. I won't be exhaustively reviewing concepts about housing in general or calf hutches specifically. Rather, I want to point out a few of the things I've seen and perhaps what to look for when I tour farms and specifically related to calf hutches. There are several interesting and useful references at the website in this written calf note, so be sure to review those for more background information and related to calf housing in general and the use of hutches in particular. So let's begin. When I think about any shelter for calves, I think that there are certain requirements, and that is that calves require a safe, clean, and dry housing. And when I think of these things, I think about some general concepts. First of all, the calf can rest naturally. The calf can preserve body heat in the cold. The calf can escape the sun, the wind, the rain, and the snow. The shelter, whatever type of shelter, is dry and comfortable. The environment within the shelter is not excessively hot nor excessively cold and is not too wet. Good air quality without drafts is a really important concept. And finally, the shelter should be constructed and managed to minimize the risk of disease transmission. When we consider all of these things in total, it's clear that calf hutches are an excellent housing option for calves from 0 to about 4 months of age, and that's why they are so widely used on farms all over the world. I summarize the important concept into 4 key principles, or Q-tips if you will. They are that the shelter needs to be safe, it needs to be clean, it needs to be comfortable, and finally it needs to be efficient. From the perspective of safe, the questions I might ask include, can the calf escape the elements? Does the shelter minimize the risk of infection? And does the air quality minimize noxious elements without the risk of drafts? Clean? Can the shelter be easily sanitized? And does management allow time between calves to reduce the pathogen load? Comfortable? Is the environment dry? Can the calf maintain its body temperature within the shelter? Can the calf exhibit natural behavior, that is, turn around, walk, and move naturally? And is the internal environment similar to or better than the external environment? And finally, efficient. Are feed and water exposed to the elements? Are they easily managed? Does the shelter have a satisfactory usable life, and is it labor efficient? Before we start talking about and walking the farm, let's define what we'll discuss today. I will define hutches as different from pens, which provide one or more living spaces generally inside a barn, as we can see here on the left, and crates, which may be inside or outside and provide one calf with living space, usually elevated above the ground over a slatted floor. Hutches, on the other hand, are constructed from plastic, metal, wood, or other materials to provide usually one calf or sometimes a group of calves with a living space, but normally individually and normally housed outside. Larger super hutches are similar but provide shelter for a small group of calves. Now, some recent research suggests that calves less than about 2 months of age can be housed in groups of hutches in small groups together. While this is an interesting idea from a welfare perspective and perhaps efficiency perspective, I've seen very few implementations of this concept when I've walked the farm. Therefore, today we'll consider hutches that house one calf individually to approximately 2 months of age, and then hutches that house groups of calves, in 4 or 8 per group, in generally to about 4 months of age. Let's begin by talking about safety. The most important element of any housing system is that it allows the animal to escape the effects of the environment, the wind, the sun, the rain, the snow, and the cold. In addition, the hutch should minimize the risk of infection. We'll discuss a few examples of how this works. And then finally, the air quality of the shelter should be excellent, and there should be a minimal risk of noxious elements without drafts. Normally, well-managed hutches, this air quality is rarely an issue, but it bears monitoring when we walk the farm. The hutches generally need to be constructed and managed to allow the calf to escape the effects of the environment. And in the picture above, we can see that these plastic hutches, well constructed, and do allow the calves, even after a large central U.S. snowstorm, to be inside these hutches and happy and dry and comfortable. Calves need to be able to escape the elements when they wish. Usually, hutches provide adequate shelter for young calves. However, this is not always the case. We can see some applications of hutches that are not safe for the calf. And for example, in the top left photo here, calves must be able to escape the elements when they wish. Usually, hutches provide adequate shelter for young calves. However, this is not always the case. We can see some applications of hutches that are not really safe for the calf. In the top left photo, we see a hutch on a farm in the southern U.S. that was simply made of wire and covered with shade cloth. This contains the calf, but does not allow the calf to escape the wind or the rain. So from a production or welfare point of view, this is an inadequate implementation. In the top right photo, we can see a calf from a farm in Russia that's housed in a hutch with a fabric door, which allows the calf greater protection against the Russian winter. This is an excellent idea, particularly in this climate, but care must be taken to check ventilation and the buildup of ammonia inside these hutches, because the fabric door essentially eliminates the amount of airflow into and out of these hutches. The checks related to ventilation and buildup of ammonia need to happen at least every other day. The bottom left is a farm in Denmark. This was taken in January, and although it was well below 0 degrees centigrade, these calves were happy and healthy. The primary challenge, and a common complaint about individual hutches that are outside, is that it's harder on the workers, the labor, than it is on the calves. Of course, this farmer was well aware of the need to adjust feeding levels for the increased amount of energy these calves needed to stay warm. And finally, on the bottom right is from a farm in the central part of the U.S., where these newborn calves are housed in individual hutches inside the maternity barn, where they'll stay until they're about 24 or 48 hours of age. Note the large amount of straw that is intended to allow these calves to stay warm as they adjust to their new environment. Calves should be able to move into the interior of the hutch and be out of the elements, the wind, the rain, etc. In the top photo, from a farm in the central U.S., we see these hutches pointing east because the prevailing winter winds on this location almost always come from the west. However, the previous night's snowstorm was abnormal and actually came in from the east. The orientation of the hutch is important. In cold climates, the hutches can be pointed with the back to the prevailing winds to provide additional shelter. Many experts recommend facing hutches to the south in northern climates to take advantage of additional sunlight. The bottom photo was taken on a farm in South America. This farm made their own hutches from wire panels and covered partially with tin. This provided plenty of ventilation, but there were several drawbacks, including the inability of the calf to completely escape the elements. And I'll discuss a little bit more about these specific hutches in just a few moments when we talk about the temperature. We can learn from good management as well as from improper management. On this farm in the southern U.S., the farmer believed that because it's always warm, that a low-cost approach was enough. Unfortunately, these hutches provided inadequate shelter, and it was clear these calves experienced significant stress due to their inability to escape the elements. Note the colored strips on the placards on the front of these hutches. These are notices of the types and numbers of veterinary treatments, antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, etc., that these calves were being treated with. It was clear these calves were being exposed to a significant amount of stress, and we recommended that wholesale changes be made to this housing system and they consider some other options. Isolation or social distancing is a fundamental tenet to hutches, and really the primary reason we put them in hutches in the first place, to keep them separated until their immune systems are strong enough for them to defeat common diseases such as cryptosporidium, rotavirus, or coronavirus. Remember that the nadir of the immune system, that low point of the immune system, occurs at about 4 to 6 weeks of age. So maintaining calves in individual hutches until they're 8 to 9 weeks of age is a great strategy. So if we look at some hutches clockwise from the top, here we have hutches in the state of Minnesota that are adequately separated. Many experts recommend keeping about 4 feet or about 1.3 meters between hutches and 10 feet or about 3 meters between rows of hutches. And we can see, although the top two farms have different alignments, that the amount of social distancing here is quite appropriate. These calves can't touch each other, so there's really little risk that they're going to be transmitting diseases from one another. Therefore, the primary sources of transmission of disease will be buckets, bottles, feeding equipment, and the labor itself. We have two pictures from a Russian farm, and we can see that these hutches are crowded together in order to get them all underneath this roof. And we can see that the hutches are side by side, and the exercise area in front of the hutches are too close, and these animals are going to be able to touch each other, and we really defeat the purpose of the hutch in providing social distancing in this situation. On large farms, it can be a challenge to have calves close enough for efficient labor, but also to maintain social distancing. This farm in California found a great way to be efficient, but still provide for social distancing. This California farm alternates the direction of the hutches to allow greater concentration of calves while maintaining social distancing. The workers can still access calves on both sides of the row and be efficient with labor, but there's still sufficient space between these to minimize the risk of transmission of disease. Note also the slope that the farmer has built up with this implementation. We'll talk a bit more about slope in just a few moments. This farm in California alternates rows of hutches, as you can see in the photo here, front to back, similar to the previous pictures. But they also do another management practice that can reduce the risk of infection. These hutches that these workers are currently moving were previously disinfected and now are being reset on a new area that has not housed calves for about 10 weeks. This old area will be cleaned and removed. All of the manure and soil bedding will be graded and will become the drive lane for the next 8 to 10 weeks. So this area here will have an opportunity to rest and hopefully kill the majority of the potential pathogens in this environment due to the rain, sun, and UV radiation. This is a really good idea, and I recommend it for any producers that have this ability. I mentioned orientation previously and suggested that orientation is very important. It's often recommended that hutches face south in the winter in the northern hemisphere to take advantage of sunlight during the cold winter months. While this is generally true, many producers have successfully implemented this back-to-back approach without an effect on calf health or performance. And there's a really interesting read on calving ease from May 2000. Here's the link you can go to find that information, written by Sam Ledley. They implemented this back-to-back approach, and Sam writes about those experiences. It's also really important to take into consideration when we think about orientation is that the prevailing winds, the locations of barns, silos, lagoons, and other structures need to be considered. It's really important to minimize the risk that any contaminated air will flow over the calves and become a potential risk of infection. This photo from Poland shows calves in hutches with poor ventilation. Subsequently, the air quality inside the hutches was poor. Although the farmer worked extra hard to keep them clean, the combination of limited drainage, you'll note if you look closely, these hutches are on concrete, and the concrete has no slope, that is, it's perfectly flat. The minimum slope, the poor ventilation resulted in a buildup of ammonia inside these hutches. And because these hutches have only a limited window in the back to allow air to exchange, these calves had some pretty significant respiratory problems. Here's a photo of one of the calves from these hutches, and you can see indications of problems. There were other calves that showed similar kinds of symptoms with snotty noses, with contaminated eyes. In this case, we talked to the farmer about testing for ammonia inside the hutches, and a very easy approach is to use these ammonia test strips. They're very cheap, they're easy to use, and they give a good indication of ammonia buildup. Research conducted with these test strips or the more advanced Draeger unit have both reported good accuracy. So for large operations where ammonia is going to be tested on a regular basis, maybe this would be a good approach, but these ammonia test strips are cheap, easy to use, quick, and quite accurate. So they can be a good test for determining air quality. And normally we think about issues with air quality only in barns, and we don't normally think about it in hutches. But in this particular case, the combination of concrete, lack of slope, and poor ventilation in the hutch ended up resulting in problems that we needed to address. Well, let's discuss the concept of clean. It's really important that the calf enter and can stay in a clean environment. And reducing the pathogen load is critical to the success of any type of housing. And hutches that can be easily and completely disinfected and moved, as I mentioned previously, to a new area between calves is best. Permanent locations, porous materials, and hutches that are difficult to move, in my opinion at least, are less desirable. In the photo at the top, we see a worker on a California dairy who is pressure washing a plastic hutch with soap and disinfectant to reduce and eliminate the pathogen load. Below, we see a smaller farm in the state of Iowa where this worker is doing a similar procedure, but doing it manually. Plastic is a great material for disinfection. It's not porous, it's easy to clean, and is quite sturdy if it's made properly. Other materials such as wood, as we can see in this picture on the right, are inherently more porous and are more difficult, or in some cases impossible, to sanitize. They can't be cleaned as well, and although this farmer attempted to reduce the porosity of the wood by painting and reduce the number of pores, it's not complete, and you can see areas where the paint is chipped off, or there are cracks that allow for the buildup of manure and bacteria. It's just not complete. So as we think about disinfection, the plastic hutches really have an inherent advantage compared to other materials. As I mentioned previously, moving hutches, in my opinion, is a great idea. Every producer should consider this as a management strategy. On the other hand, these hutches here at a farm in Europe are on a concrete slab. Once these calves leave, the area will be cleaned. These hutches will be moved, and the concrete will be scraped, and possibly will be pressure washed prior to resetting the hutches and moving some new calves in. Concrete does have its advantages, with the advantage of being able to clean easily. However, over time there will be potential buildup of pathogens in this region, and at a certain point this expensive concrete pad will need to be allowed to sit open to the elements to reduce the pathogen load. Comfortable is another key component of successful shelter for calves. And here are some of the questions I think about. Is the environment dry? Can the calf maintain its body temperature in the shelter? Can the calf exhibit natural behavior, that is, turn, walk, and move naturally? Is the internal environment similar to or better than the external environment? Now, comfortable doesn't need to be fancy. A clean, dry area where the calf can rest and escape the elements and maintain its body temperature. And you can see here this clean plastic hutch is a great environment for this calf, and this calf will be very comfortable in here for the entire time it's there. Dryness is really important. And one of the ways we can look at dryness is to compare knees. Let's take a look. Look at the knees here on this calf and the knees here on this calf. Who's drier? The knee test is an easy way to determine dryness of a hutch. If you can't see calves' knees, well, then it's up to you or a volunteer to enter the hutch and kneel. And use a paper towel, will you? That will keep your knees from getting too wet, perhaps. Put the paper towel on the bedding. Kneel on the paper towel and count to 10. Stand up and then look at the paper towel. Is it wet? Does the paper towel show an indication of wet knees? Then you have a clear indication that drainage or inadequate bedding has resulted in these wet knees, and that's always going to be a problem. This calf is on a concrete pad and has limited drainage. So there's a natural buildup of moisture here because the moisture is simply not able to move away. The calf on the right is in a hutch, also bedded with straw, but is on top of a gravel pad, and underneath the gravel is some larger rock to allow the moisture, the urine, and any water to drain through and move away from the animal. Drainage is really important to dryness. Many farms will use a system of, from top to bottom, of bedding, of drainage fabric, maybe small gravel on top of larger gravel. And some systems may even have tile drainage below the gravel to collect urine and water and move it to a pit or some type of a lagoon. Another good draining bedding is sand, which is very permeable and drains very well. On the other hand, concrete doesn't drain and requires additional bedding to hold the moisture until it can be picked up. Now, the slope is always important, and you can see here these hutches on sand are sloped so that any moisture, urine, water that's dripping, or precipitation will move down the slope and away from the calf. This calf facility in Iowa uses about 3 inches from the bottom, or 7.6 centimeters of large stone, covered by a similar depth of smaller gravel and then drain cloth, as you can see here. This land has a natural southerly slope, allowing both good sunlight penetration coming from the south during the winter month, but also allows the liquid to drain away from the calves. So this was a really good installation for not only sun and orientation, but also from drainage. As I mentioned, slope, it has a lot to do with drainage and dryness. This may be a bit of an exaggeration. I think these calves are climbing the hill actually to get up into their bedding, but it does show the importance, and you can perhaps see some of the moisture that is moving down. You can see here moving down away from the calves. This bottom photo shows an area with no slope, and all the moisture this calf is going to produce is going to stay here and will not move unless it's going to move through the gravel and away from the calf in that manner. Ventilation and temperature go hand in hand. Hutches with limited ventilation will get hot in the summertime, even hotter than normal. Many farmers may use bricks or cinder blocks in the back of the hutch to raise the bottom of the hutch a few centimeters and allow additional ventilation in the summer. This can be really effective in reducing the internal temperature. However, just make sure that the hutches are secured to the ground. I have heard stories when I was walking the farm of hutches that were picked up by the wind and blown around because of this elevation. On the left, we have a picture of a super hutch with, at this moment anyway, relatively limited ventilation. We can see the back window, if you will, only 3 small holes. Now, these doors could be opened to increase the ventilation, but currently, perhaps because of the cold weather when I was visiting this farm, that they don't have them open. But one of the concerns here is that it looks wet. Is there a buildup of ammonia inside this hutch? On the right is a farm in Western Europe, in the northwestern part of Europe. Generally a fairly mild climate, but this hutch is kind of unique because there is no system for opening any type of a window or ventilation unit in the back of this hutch, and so there's really no way for the air to exchange inside this hutch. And these will be very problematic in many parts of the world, and so I have trouble making recommendations to use a hutch like this. Some hutches are translucent and may permit light and heat to penetrate. These can get really hot in the summertime and may need to be used in shade or with shade cloth, or they may even need to be painted. Here you see on the left a calf inside one of these translucent hutches. On the right, on a farm in the southeastern part of the U.S., these hutches were moved underneath the trees because when they were out in the open, they became extremely hot, almost 40 degrees centigrade, and very uncomfortable for the calves. Research trials done with these types of hutches indicates they can become quite hot in the summer, and some type of remediation is normally required. Flies can be a significant problem in all calf installations, and straw is the type of bedding that flies generally like the most. In this study from 1991, researchers noticed the greatest number of house and stable flies were found when calves were bedded with straw. You can see here the blue bars in all cases were higher, the number of flies higher than the other bedding types. And so in summer, it may make sense to consider at least using some other type of bedding type. Sand, gravel, wood shavings, or sawdust can be effective and reduce the number of flies. The photo on the left, you see all these black specks. Those are flies inside one of those round hutches we looked at previously, and the buildup of both heat and flies made this calf very uncomfortable and very highly stressed. These hutches may be 10 or 15 degrees warmer inside due to the radiation of heat in this metal. I visited this farm during the cooler part of the year. However, when I placed my hand on the inside of the metal part of the hutch, I could feel the heat radiating into the hutch. And during the summer, when temperatures in this part of South America can reach 35 or 37 degrees, this additional radiant heat could really stress these calves. We discussed the need to test this theory with the farmer, and he agreed that when it became warmer, he would place a thermometer inside the hutch in the corner where it would be the warmest, and check that thermometer several times a day to see if the inside of the hutch was going to be that much warmer than the outside. Wean calves in small groups adapt well generally and are more easily managed. Super hutches are a really good way to transition calves from individual hutches to larger groups, and we can manage these super hutches in ways similar to those for individual hutches. And generally, when these groups are kept small, 4 to 8 calves, 8 calves at the most, per hutch, the transition goes very easily and can be a good step from the individual hutch into before the calf moves into larger groups. Efficiency is the final component of calf hutches in any shelter, really. And here the questions I typically ask are related to feed and water. Are they exposed to the elements? Are they easily managed? Does the shelter have a satisfactory, useful life, and is it labor efficient? One of the advantages of plastic hutches, although they generally have more initial upfront costs, is their long life. They're easy to clean and over time will have a positive return on investment. There are some issues that can reduce efficiency. One is the location of the feed and water buckets, something I find somewhat interesting. You can see both the top photos here, all of the feed buckets are outside. This makes it much easier to change the feed in the water. The workers can move very efficiently between hutches, between groups of calves. However, when there's precipitation, snow, rain, whatever, then all of the feed that's out here can become spoiled. The other alternative is to have hutches with the feed and water buckets inside, and the calf also can have the option of drinking inside. These tend to be more efficient from the standpoint of feed efficiency and minimizing the waste of feed, whereas the others tend to be more efficient from the standpoint of labor. You can see this Jersey farm also has most of the all of the buckets, feed and water buckets, on the outside. Now, in this part of the United States, there is quite a period of the summertime where there's very little precipitation, so the losses associated with contaminated feed are generally quite poor. Other regions where precipitation is much more frequent, this can be quite a challenge, and additional feed management needs to be taken into consideration. So in summary, hutches are a great housing system. When managed properly, they provide a safe, clean, and comfortable home for calves, and they are efficient in terms of labor management. Social distancing until calves have stronger immune systems are a key advantage to hutches, and in most cases, the primary reason they're so popular around the world. They are clean, safe, clean, comfortable, and efficient, and I highly recommend their use. This review of calf hutch applications covered some aspects of hutch management. I've shown you a few examples of where management has been quite good and some other cases where it's gone wrong. There are a number of references I will remind you on the website on the PDF file, so feel free to stop by and read for additional information. That'll do it for today. Thanks for watching.